room. And I saw this project coming down sometime back, and I just watched it. But it didn't trouble me considerably because I heard Summit and Navigator say, we're not going to be asking for eminent domain. We will bring this through and negotiate for these easements without eminent domain. I spent my life working on these farms around here. I know you. And this land means more than what you could just negotiate your way through some of the best farmland in the world and drop your excavators and bulldozers into it without eminent domain. I knew you were going to have to make that ask. And when that happened, that's what lit me up. And we formed an organization called freesoilfoundation.com. We're operating in 5 states right now, networking in the landowners to make sure they know what their rights are. But that's what my motivation is. I'm the former chairman of the Constitution Committee in the United States Congress, and I care about our property rights, and I have a long record, a congressional record and public record of defending property rights. So I want to just address a few things here. One is the process that I'm looking at. And it's been normal protocol in the past that the chair of the then board, now commission, would be here seated to run this meeting. I don't see the commissioners here. And it's been normal too that the consumer advocate would be sitting at this panel asking questions. That's not happening either. And I'm looking here, there's some notes being taken, but I've been informed that there's no recording of any audio or video and no formal record of this discussion. And so if you're taking your message back to the commissioners, that's the only way this gets there. And if you're carrying this back to your bosses, that's the only way this gets there. There's not really other than this recording here and others. But the process is not what it used to be, and I'll let you understand what I think about what it should be, is what it used to be. But the property rights side of this thing is this, that the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution says, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. And we know there's a Kelo decision that said public use or public purpose. Justice Scalia looked me in the eye that same week and he said it's an erroneous decision and it will be reversed one day. This may be the case that reverses it, but also the Constitution of the state of Iowa is stronger on property rights than the U.S. Constitution is today, primarily because of that Kelo decision. And this is going to be a long fight. It's just the beginning of this thing, not the end of it by any means. But what's curious is, and no one else mentions this on the Constitution side, and I'm just looking at Mr. Mikulinski when I say this because I know you're an expert in this. Nobody talks about the omission in the United States Constitution where nor shall private property be taken for public use. There's no mention in there, nor shall private property be taken for private use without just compensation. That omission doesn't give you constitutional authority to condemn people's private property. It was beyond the scope of the founders and the framers of the Constitution to think that anything could happen where you could have private property taken for private use. And this is a private company. We had witnesses right here in a hearing early last year that said he wanted to buy shares in exchange for the easement. He was turned down in that. That's under oath. So there's much to be said about the litigation. Also, people think that there is a permit and it's a green light, and it's not. Here are some of the barriers. There's no disposal site approved in North Dakota. I think Jake mentioned that, however. And so there's no disposal site that's been approved, and that has to be done by the Industrial Commission in North Dakota. Not done. There's no pathway, no right-of-way for a pipeline in North Dakota. That's not done. There's litigation in North Dakota that because they have an amalgamation lawsuit is this, that they call it pore space. Wherever the CO2 would go is called pore space, the formations that it be pumped down into. And they have a law up there that says that 60% of the people that own that pore space, if they agree, then the other 40% are just going to have to go along with it. That's being litigated. That's North Dakota. South Dakota, you've got the situation that you heard Jake talk about, of the Supreme Court remanding the decision back down to the circuit courts, the 2 circuit courts, the 3rd and the 5th. But in that, they defined what a commodity was and what a public utility was, or a common carrier, and more or less took the definition away from the justices at the circuit court level in the South Dakota. That's a huge barrier. I'm not saying it's the end of the deal, but it's a huge barrier. Plus, you have a resolution in South Dakota to reverse legislation that had been passed last year that took away local property rights and the local control. They want to put that back, and they had 34,000 to 38,000 signatures on a petition to get that done. There's many barriers along the way, plus the legislative session in between this. So it's a long, hard slog to get to the point where you should think this is inevitable. And I'm asking you to keep your powder dry on this till you get a real good look at it. I've been looking at it hard for 2 years, and I don't know it all yet. On the safety side of this thing, what all I've heard is true. It's honestly and it's objectively true. However, nobody's talked about Lake Nyos in Cameroon in West Africa. 1986, there's a lake there, a little smaller than 1 square mile. And there was a natural burp of CO2 that came out of that lake. Of course, it spread across the water. It's 1.15 times heavier than the air in the atmosphere. It spread across the water, went to the outlet where the lake goes, down the valley, and it killed between 1,700 and 2,000 people. 3,000 to 4,000 head of cattle, every goat, every chicken, every bird, everything. And the man that walked in there after they were all dead, and the air had cleared and dissipated, I listened to his video, and he said, the eeriest thing among all of those dead people and animals was there wasn't even the buzzing of a fly. Not even of a fly, because it killed them too. And if you want to think this is safe, we euthanize hogs within this country. I've been to witness that and be part of it. We do it with chickens too. I mean, it's very, very deadly in concentration. And the plume studies that we have, well, we don't have the plume studies, and I'd like to know who actually said that it's a national security issue when you've got Chinese investment in this company, and I can name Smithfield and Syngenta for starters, and probably more. But they're going to know what these plume studies are. They're likely sitting there on the board looking at those plume studies. But we need to know what that is. Navigator put out a plume study for an 8-inch line in either South or North Dakota, and they said 1,855 feet on either side of the center line of the pipe. That's the only thing we have to work with now. But we need dynamic plume studies that are including the elevations, the wind speed, and the direction, and the temperature, so that we can calculate where this might go, and you can plug it into your own and figure it out for yourselves. But we're a long ways away from knowing the risk of this thing on the safety. And then the last thing is that the alternatives. That do we have to build a pipeline? No. We already know from the scientific side. I don't agree with that, of course. But if we're going to step in and tap into these credits, if we're going to save ethanol, building 6 ethanol plants in Brazil is no help. 1.3 billion gallons of ethanol coming out of Bruce Rassetter's ethanol plants with his Chinese partners in Brazil is no help. And clearing the trees so they can produce 4 billion bushel of corn down there at Mato Grosso in Brazil, that's no help to our markets either. So we've got a guy that's got one thing going on in Brazil, and he's saying something down there. He's got something else he says in North Dakota, because that's the oil country, and he says something else in Iowa and in South Dakota. And the alternative, however, is this, that if we're going to tap into these credits, if we're going to really do something, let's keep the dollars at home, here in Iowa and in South Dakota, wherever it might be, and we can do that because we have 2 companies. One of them testified right here last year, Jeff Bonner, Cap CO2. There's another company called Carbon Sync, and Randy Roy is the CEO of that one. I know both these guys. And they want to go in these ethanol plants and take the CO2, convert it to methanol, and right at the location site. We also are looking at the science that says it might be even more economical to turn ethanol and methanol into green jet fuel right at the ethanol site. In any case, it nullifies the need for pipelines. And the bottom line is this: once you look at this thing like I have for 2 years or more grinding through this, you'll realize the only real rationale is about getting Bruce Rassetter a monopoly, a quasi-monopoly, on 57 ethanol plants and the CO2 that comes out of them, and the control of the ethanol plants by controlling the valve on the CO2. And so, I don't have any questions, but I appreciate your attention and your comments, and I will sit down and listen.